Let's look at number 1. Use the following numbers to answer questions A through B. On A, we're going to plot each number on the number line. So the first number we have is 7. So I'm going to put 7 here and put the number on top. Then we have -3, which is going to be 3 to the right of 0. So -3. Then we have 2, 0, it's kind of already plotted for us, -12. It's going to be 2 to the left of -10. Then we have a +3. We have a -5. And we also have -9, which is going to be 1 to the right of -10. It says, how do you know that each number you plotted is an integer? Well, we know they're an integer because they are positive numbers and their opposites. I also added their whole numbers, and they do not contain fractions or decimals. So remember, integers cannot contain a decimal or a fraction. So the next section, we're still looking at integers. We're trying to sort, is it an integer, is it negative, or is it a positive integer? So -12 is going to be a negative integer because it's an opposite of a whole. And then 1 2/10 is not an integer because it has a decimal. 18 is a positive integer. 10½ is not an integer because it has a fraction. -150 is a negative integer. 1 5/10 or 1 50/100 is not an integer because it has a decimal. 9 9/10 is not an integer because it has a fraction. -3 is a negative, and 37. Okay, so in number 3, we're trying to identify which categories they fall into. So we need to remember that whole numbers are 0, 1, 2, etc., all the way to positive infinity. Integers are negative numbers that do not have fractions and whole numbers. And then rational numbers are pretty much any number that can be written as a ratio. So -11 is not a whole number because think about, you can't have -11 pizzas. And we also learned that if it's an integer, it's automatically a rational number. So remember, if it's whole, it's automatically an integer. If it's an integer, it's automatically rational. 2 45/100. Well, whole numbers can't have decimals and neither can integers, so it's only rational. 1 is a whole number. You can have 1 pizza. And if it's a whole number, it's automatically an integer, it's automatically rational. -11/7 is not a whole number, it's not an integer, it is only rational because it has a fractional part. Okay, number 4, write a number sentence to represent each model. So both of these are adding. So if you notice, we have 1, 2 positives, so we're going to write 2 plus, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 negatives, plus a -9. And then we talked about the positive and a negative cancel each other out, which gives us a -7 because we have 7 negative circles left over. So in the number line, we always start at 0. So here's 0, so it started here. So it went -3 first, and then it turned around and went a +8. Which ended us up at a +5. Okay, let's take a look at question 5. We're comparing two sets of numbers, but we need to remember that these two lines that look like this are called absolute value. And absolute value is always positive because it's the distance from 0. So you might write yourself a note that absolute value is always positive. So if I look at this, I have -8 9/10. There's no absolute value around it, so it stays negative. But then I also have a -9, but it's the absolute value, which would give me a +9. So I know a +9 is greater than -8 9/10. Next, we have 2 5/8 compared to -2 9/16. So we have to take the absolute value, which would give us a positive. But now we're comparing two fractions, and it's easier to do that with common denominators. So I'm going to change this 8 to a 16, so times 2. So this would be greater. So name the opposite of each number. Remember, we talked about the opposite. It's on the opposite side of the number line from that number. So -1, the opposite would be 1. The opposite to 24 would be negative. The opposite to negative 100 would be 100. The opposite to negative 95 would be 95. And the opposite to to positive 15 is negative 15. So next we have some more absolute value. So remember, you take the absolute value first. It's like parentheses in order of operations. So you have 4 plus this. Remember, it stays positive. So even if it's positive, don't change it to negative. 4 plus 6 is 10. And then we have 20 minus the absolute value of negative 36 is going to be a positive 36. Oh, but now we have 20 minus 36. So we're going to have to do keep, change, change. So we have 20 plus negative 36. So you have to be thinking in your head, okay, I've got to subtract them, which will give me 16. And my negative is more negative than the positive is positive. So negative 16. So this next one, you're going to solve the inside first. So you have the absolute value of negative 19. We're going to keep, change, change. So now we have negative 19 plus a positive 14, which will give us a negative 5. So the absolute value would be positive 5. So this which absolute value number sentence is false? So the absolute value of 7 is 7. The absolute value of negative 6 is 6. So this one's right, so it's not A. So the absolute value of negative 15 is positive 15 minus the absolute value of negative 8, which is 8, which does give us 7. The absolute value of negative 12 is a positive 12, plus the absolute value of negative 2 is a positive 2. Oh, but that gives us 14. So let's go ahead and check D, though. The absolute value of 11 is 11, minus the absolute value of negative 4, which is positive 4, and that does give us 7. So C is the correct answer. On number 9, we're ordering from least to greatest, but remember, take your absolute values first. So negative 12 is actually 12, and negative 10.5 is actually a positive 10.5. And remember, they have to have the lines around them for you to take absolute value. So least to greatest, so we're needing to look for the biggest negative first. So negative 9 is the biggest negative, so that would be our least number. Then we would have negative 6 and 6/10. And then we would have our 8 and 4/9. Then we would have the absolute value of negative 10.5. And finally, we would have the absolute value of negative 12. Okay, we are on number 10. We only have a few more to go. So remember, we only do keep, change, change when we're subtracting. So when it's adding, just add. So 8 plus a negative 11 right here would give me a negative 3, plus a positive 5 would give me positive 2. Next, you have negative 12 plus negative 34, so we're just going to add them because they're the same signs. So that would give me a negative 46. Next, you have negative 15 plus a positive 8. So remember, when they're opposite signs, you need to be subtracting, so you got to think about that in your head, which would give me 7, but the 15 is bigger, so it belongs with a negative. And something you might do on your test is be like, okay, I'm going to square the number that's bigger. So negative 38 is bigger, so I know my answer has to be negative. So these are different as well, so we need to do 38 minus 29. So we're going to borrow, make this 18. So it's 9, so the answer would be negative 9. So now we're at a subtraction one. Now we need to do the keep, change, change. So write it underneath, keep, change, change. So you have negative 12 plus a positive 16. And that's easy now. So it's just 16 minus 12, which is 4. So here we go again, keep, change, change, 15 plus, this is a positive 36. We're going to change it to a negative 36. So then I have to think in my head, okay, different signs. I have to subtract them. So 11, 21. So this will be, you will have a negative 21. Sorry, my hand keeps hitting stuff to make it close out of the app. Okay, next we have adding and subtracting. Remember what I said, especially if you were in my class. I said cover up. Just cover up, act like it's not there for a minute. And then solve the first part and then take it off. So negative 10 plus a positive 5 would give me a negative 5. Now we're going to take this away. And now we're going to keep this. We're going to change, change. So plus a positive 3, which will end up giving us a negative 2. And then we have negative 16, keep, change. So we're going to keep the negative 17, change it to addition, change this to negative 18. They're both negative, so we're going to add them. So 18 plus 17, we'll get 15, and that'll be 35. So it'll be a negative 35 since both numbers are negative. Okay, keep, change. Add, now it's a positive 42, so we're just straight adding. So that'll give me a 77 as my final answer. Okay, the table gives us the lowest temperatures ever recorded in 5 U.S. cities. Use the table to answer each question. So it says, what is the difference? So remember, we need to remember difference means to subtract between the greatest temperature, which I see is Honolulu, it's 53, minus the least temperature, which is Huron, South Dakota, which is a negative 41. So then we do keep, change. So then you have 53 plus a positive 41, which when you add that, if you need to come over to the side and add this, you'll get a 4 and a 9, so that's 94 degrees. Now it says, how much greater is Norfolk's lowest temperature, which is negative 3, minus St. Louis's lowest temperature, which is negative 18. And then we have to do keep, change again. Negative 3 plus a positive 18 will give me 15 degrees. Okay, let's go through the word problems. Remember to write a number sentence. It helps you clarify what's going on in the problem. And then reread the sentence to make sure your number sentence matches the story. So it says, if it is 5 degrees outside and the temperature will drop, meaning it's going to go down. So I have 5 degrees and it's going to drop, which would be subtracting 17 degrees. In the next 6 hours, how cold will it get? So then we have to do our keep, change. So we have 5 plus a negative 17, which will give us a negative 12 if you do 17 minus 5. And it's going to be 12 degrees for your label. Next it says Haley has $47 in her bank account. She withdraws. Remember we talked about withdrawals the other day, means to take out. What is Haley's new balance? So she has $47. She takes out $55. So we need to do our keep, change, because we can't just subtract them. So I'll get 47 plus a negative 55. Different signs we're subtracting. So if you subtract that, you'll get a negative 8. So she went below 0, which is not good in banking. Okay, it will be negative 12 degrees tonight. The weatherman predicts it will be 25 degrees warmer. So warmer means it's going to go up. So negative 12 plus a positive 25. We don't need to do keep, change, because it's just adding. So then we have to think in our head, okay, I need to do 25 minus 12, which is 13. And it's going to be a positive 13 degrees because the 25 positive is greater than the negative 12. Okay, a scuba diver swam 96 feet beneath the surface. So remember, beneath is like a negative of the lake. And then he climbs 49 feet. What is his depth now? So you have a negative 96 plus a positive 49. So 96 minus 49. You have 7, because we had to borrow, make that 16. 4. So he ended up at negative 47, or 47 below the surface of the lake. Great job getting your review done. Now study and make sure you know all of those key words. Actually, let's go over them on the next page real quick. So let's take a look at some keywords real quick. So one thing we need to keep in mind is our rational family circle. So we have rational. This is something you might write as soon as you get your test tomorrow. Integers. And then you have your wholes. And you need to remember, the wholes start with 1 and count up. Integers are positive and negative numbers. without any decimals. You cannot have decimals. And then rational numbers can be any number, positive or negative, that can be written as a fraction. Okay, another thing to keep in mind is the absolute value sign. Remember, we talked about this earlier. This means absolute value. It's the distance from 0. And it's always going to be positive. Your answer should always be positive in the absolute value. And then lastly, we need to remember that same sign, we should be finding the sum. Same sign, sum. Different sign, difference, when you're solving these problems. So I hope these are helpful ways to remember. Another way that I told my students is positive and positive, they're happy, they get to add. Negative, negative, they're happy, they get to add. But a negative and a positive, not very happy. So we need to subtract because they're sad.